She was handed to a Mafia boss as punishment. There was no way out. The rain fell in sheets across the city, turning the cobbled streets into mirrors of liquid silver. Lanterns flickered in the wind, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper secrets. In this city, wealth and power were never hidden. They were displayed like trophies, gilded and untouchable. Yet in the alleys beneath the glittering skyline, darkness ruled, and every whisper carried a threat. Lysandra's boots clicked sharply against the wet stone as she walked. Her cloak, black and heavy, clung to her shoulders, damp with rain. She had never walked these streets willingly. The city had always felt like a cage to her, beautiful from afar but cruel up close. And tonight she understood its cruelty more than ever. She had been accused of a theft she did not commit. The documents, the missing family jewels, the broken trust, it was all a lie. A political enemy had planted evidence, and now her family had no choice. She had to pay for a crime she did not commit. And the payment was her freedom. Her hands trembled, though she tried to hide it. She hated the fear that pricked her skin, the kind of fear that made every heartbeat feel loud in the silence. She hated being handed like a prize or worse, a punishment to a man she had only heard of in whispers, Don Callan. Even saying his name made her stomach tight. The city feared him. Families owed him allegiance, debts, and sometimes their very lives. His reputation was not built on kindness. They said he could crush a man with a glance, and some claimed he had made deals with forces no mortal should touch. Lysandra had never seen him. Yet even now she could imagine his tall frame, the sharp lines of his face, and the cold, calculating eyes that had never known mercy. The carriage door creaked open. Two silent men stepped forward, their coats black as the night, hats pulled low. Lysandra's family had not come with her. There had been no embrace, no final words of comfort, only instructions. You must obey. There is no other way. She climbed into the carriage and sat stiffly, her hands clasped together in her lap. Outside, the rain lashed the window. Inside, silence wrapped around her like a shroud. She tried to think, tried to plan an escape, but the carriage rattled and turned, carrying her away from the world she knew into one she did not. The mansion appeared like a shadow rising out of the storm. Its walls were tall black stone, and the windows glowed with a strange golden light. A faint scent of smoke and incense drifted from the chimneys. The air seemed heavier here, almost alive, as if the building itself were watching. The carriage stopped and the men ushered her out. Lysandra's boots sank slightly in the mud, but she forced herself to stand tall. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. Not yet. Inside, the hall was vast and dimly lit. Tapestries hung from the walls, their patterns strange and unsettling, twisting shapes that seemed to move in the candlelight. Shadows danced across her face, making her own reflection in the polished floor seem like a stranger. A voice came from the shadows, deep and calm. "You are Lysandra, I presume." She turned sharply. There, leaning against the doorway, was a man whose presence filled the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in black. His hair was dark as midnight, and his eyes were sharp, almost too sharp, like a hawk observing its prey. There was a stillness in him that made the room feel smaller, heavier. "Yes," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am Lysandra." He stepped forward, his boots silent on the marble floor. He studied her, head tilted slightly, as if trying to weigh her soul against her appearance. "You understand why you are here?" he asked. I do," she replied, though the truth was that she did not fully understand. She knew the official reason, her supposed crime, but she did not understand why her life had been handed over so easily, why her family had not defended her. Kaelin's eyes narrowed, and Lysandra felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her. "Do you fear me?" he asked, and for a moment his voice was not the harsh tone of a tyrant but something softer, almost curious. "No," she said, though her heart hammered. She refused to tremble in front of him. "Good," he said. Then, as if testing her, he added, You will need courage where others would fall." She did not ask what he meant. She only followed him as he led her through winding corridors, past doors she was not allowed to open, past portraits of men and women whose eyes seemed too alive, watching her as she passed. Finally, they reached a room at the end of the hall. It was smaller but still grand, with tall windows that looked out over the city. Candles flickered on silver sconces, and in the center of the room stood a desk cluttered with papers and strange artifacts. Kalen gestured toward it. "This is where you will stay, for now. There are rules and there will be consequences for breaking them." Lysandra's lips pressed into a thin line. She did not need to be told twice, but still she asked carefully, "Am I free to leave this room?" "No," he said simply. His voice had no anger in it, only fact. "Not until I say you may. There is no way out, Lysandra, only through." Days passed. At first, Lysandra's only companions were shadows and silence. Meals were delivered, and she was allowed to walk in the mansion's gardens under careful watch. She studied Kalen from afar, observing the subtle movements that revealed more than words ever could. He rarely raised his voice, but the quiet authority in his presence was enough to bend wills. And yet, despite the fear, she found herself drawn to him. Not with love, she refused to call it that, but with a curious fascination. He was a man shaped by power and secrets, yet even in his calculated gestures, she glimpsed flashes of something human, a hesitation before making a cruel decision, a flicker of sadness in his eyes when he thought no one watched. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Kalen entered her room without knocking. He stood in the doorway, tall and still, as if the rain itself had brought him to her. "You disobeyed me today," he said. His tone was quiet, but every word carried weight. "I did what I thought was right," she replied. He regarded her unblinking. "You are bold, dangerous perhaps, and yet there is something unbroken in you. Most would have bent long before now." Lysandra's throat tightened. She did not know what to say. She had expected anger, punishment, ridicule, but not recognition, not this strange respect that made her pulse quicken. "I do not bend easily," she said finally, her voice firmer. "No," he said, and for a moment he allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "No, you do not." They stood there, two figures in a room lit by candlelight, neither moving, both aware of the tension between them. There was no declaration of feelings, no promise of friendship, only the unspoken acknowledgement that each saw something in the other that no one else did. The next morning, Lysandra awoke to find a small, folded note on her desk. She opened it with cautious hands. In neat, precise handwriting were 3 words: "Do not falter." It was unsigned, yet she knew whose hand had written it. A shiver ran down her spine. It was not a command, not a threat, not a plea, but a recognition, and it terrified her more than any warning ever could. Later that day, Kalen summoned her to the library. The room smelled of old books and candle wax, heavy with the weight of knowledge and secrets. He sat behind a large, polished desk, fingers steepled, eyes assessing her as always. "There are things you must learn," he said. "Things that will help you survive here, and things that will test your heart." Lysandra swallowed. "I am ready," she said. Kalen leaned back, studying her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, almost as if confessing a truth to himself, "We will see." Night fell and the mansion settled into its quiet hum of shadows. Lysandra lay awake, listening to the rain, thinking of the city outside, the family she had been taken from, and the man she had been handed to. Fear lingered in her chest, yes, but so did something else, a strange, reluctant curiosity. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing clearly: her life was no longer her own. And in the darkness of Kalen's mansion, under the weight of a storm and the gaze of a man who could destroy her with a thought, Lysandra felt the first stirrings of a power she had yet to understand. The night whispered promises and warnings in equal measure. And somewhere in the shadows, Kalen watched her, thinking that perhaps this girl, this wild, unbroken girl, was unlike any other he had ever met. Tomorrow the test would begin. And neither of them could know what it would reveal. The morning air was cold, carrying a sharp scent of rain and stone from the city beyond. Lysandra wrapped her cloak tighter around her shoulders, her boots crunching on the gravel path of the mansion garden. The garden was unlike any she had seen before. Ancient statues half hidden in ivy, fountains that whispered as though the water remembered secrets from 100 years ago, and trees whose branches twisted toward the sky like fingers of shadow. She walked carefully, her eyes darting to every shadow. She had begun to realize that nothing in this mansion was as it seemed. Every corridor, every room, every whisper of wind seemed charged with a silent watchfulness. And above it all, Kalen moved like a shadow himself, always present, always observing, though rarely speaking more than necessary. Today, however, he had summoned her. His message had been brief, clipped. "Come to the library at noon. There are lessons you must learn." The library was vast, walls lined with shelves that reached the ceiling, stacked with books of every size and shape. Some were so old their bindings were cracked and faded. Others shimmered faintly, as though touched by magic. A large table sat in the center, strewn with papers, maps, and curious objects that looked both valuable and dangerous. Kalen was already there when she entered. He stood behind the table, hands resting lightly on its polished surface, eyes fixed on her as though measuring her very soul. "Good," he said simply. "You came." "I am here," she replied. She tried to keep her voice steady, though a part of her ached with nerves. Every time she faced him, every time she spoke in this strange dance of obedience and defiance, her heart raced as though she were stepping onto a battlefield. Kalen's gaze softened slightly, not entirely, but enough that she caught a glimpse of something human beneath the icy exterior. "Today, you will learn more than survival," he said. "You will learn control, not of others, but of yourself." Lysandra tilted her head, curiosity sparking. "Control?" "Yes," Kalen said, leaning back slightly. "Here there is power. Some people are born into it, some acquire it. But power without discipline is chaos, and chaos destroys everything it touches." She nodded slowly. She did not fully understand, but she had already learned that following him required caution, patience, and keen observation. He handed her a small, intricately carved box. The wood was dark, almost black, and the carvings were strange symbols she had never seen before. "Open it," he said. Lysandra hesitated. The air felt heavier in the library, charged as if the walls themselves were waiting. Finally, she lifted the lid. Inside was a single, smooth stone, black as night, with faint silver veins running through it like lightning. "Touch it," Kalen instructed. She did, her fingers brushing the cool surface. Immediately, a shiver ran up her arm. The stone thrummed beneath her touch, faintly alive as if responding to her very presence. She jerked her hand back, startled. "You felt that," Kalen said, watching her closely. "That stone is a focus. It reacts to intent, to emotion, to the strength of the soul. Few can feel it. Fewer still can control it." Lysandra's eyes widened. Her pulse quickened, a mix of fear and fascination. "Control it," she repeated. Kalen nodded. "Yes, if you wish to survive here, and if you wish to stand by my side instead of trembling in fear, you must learn to harness what you carry within. You are stronger than you know." The words were strange, almost alien. He spoke as though he believed in her, even when she did not believe in herself. The first lessons were small, almost deceptively simple. Focus on the stone. Hold your mind steady. Feel the energy around you, the weight of the room, the hum in the air. At first, Lysandra could barely sense anything. Her fingers trembled, her thoughts scattered. But Kalen was patient, guiding her with quiet words, correcting her when she faltered, never raising his voice, yet making it clear that failure had consequences. Hours passed. Sunlight faded into twilight, and Lysandra felt exhausted but strangely exhilarated. For the first time, she realized that the mansion, the shadows, even Kalen himself, were not just obstacles, they were teachers. And she was learning fast. That evening the rain returned, drumming against the windows in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Lysandra sat by the fire in her room, the black stone on the desk before her. She had begun to sense a faint warmth pulsing within it when she focused, a faint response to her will. But she also felt another presence, one she could not explain. It was then that Kalen appeared in the doorway. He did not knock. He never knocked. He simply appeared, a figure carved from shadow and firelight, his eyes holding a storm of thoughts she could not read. "You are improving," he said, his voice soft yet carrying authority, "faster than I expected." "Am I?" she asked cautiously. "Yes," he replied, "but improvement is dangerous, it attracts attention." Her heart skipped. "Attention? Enemies," he said, stepping closer. "The city is not as quiet as it seems. Rival families, ancient debts, forces older than you can imagine. They watch, they wait, and if you are not careful," his gaze darkened, sharp as a knife, "they will strike." Lysandra swallowed hard. Fear surged, but beneath it a spark of something new, a determination she had not felt before. She would not be a victim here. Not fully. Over the following days, Kalen increased the intensity of the lessons. She learned to control her emotions, to focus her mind, and to sense the energy of the world around her. And in quiet moments when he allowed it, he spoke of his past, not in detail but in fragments, a betrayal that had cost him dearly, a curse he had accepted to protect those he loved, and a loneliness that had never left him. Lysandra listened, fascinated and cautious. She began to see cracks in the armor of this man who seemed invincible. He was not just fear and authority, he was haunted, and in that haunting there was a strange beauty. One night after a particularly grueling exercise with the black stone, Lysandra sat by the window, staring at the storm outside. She felt Kalen's presence before he spoke. "You are restless," he said quietly. "I am learning," she replied. "And yet," she paused, "it feels as though there is more I should know, more I should understand." He stepped closer, silent as a shadow. "There is always more," he said. "The world is larger than we can imagine. The powers at play are not just ours. And some things cannot be explained." Lysandra felt a chill, not from the storm, but from his words. The mansion, the lessons, even Kalen himself, they were pieces of something far bigger, far older than she had realized. Then the first real test came. A rival family, known for their cruelty and cunning, had learned of Lysandra's presence in the mansion. They attacked, not openly but with precision. Traps set in the streets, messages of warning, shadows moving where there should have been none. Kalen discovered the plot before it could fully unfold, but he knew the attack would not end with him alone. Lysandra, despite her inexperience, had to act. "Take the stone," he commanded. "Use it." Her fingers closed around the black stone, and for the first time she felt a surge of power. It was not complete mastery, but it was enough. She focused, and the energy around her shifted, responding to her intent. Shadows moved, doors locked themselves, and the attackers were turned back, confused and disoriented. Kalen watched, astonished, as Lysandra moved with a confidence she had never shown before. She was no longer just the girl handed over as punishment. She was becoming something else, someone who could stand beside him, who could survive in this world of shadows and power. After the threat passed, they stood together in the dimly lit hall, breathless, soaked with rain that had followed them inside. Kalen said nothing at first, only watching her. "You saved me," he said quietly. "I did what I had to do," she replied. "Yes," he said, "and yet—" His eyes softened, and for a moment the mask of the unyielding boss slipped. "You also saved yourself." That night Lysandra could not sleep. The storm had faded, leaving the city cloaked in a pale silver light. She held the black stone in her hand, feeling its warmth, feeling her own pulse in rhythm with it. She realized something fundamental. She was no longer afraid of Kaelin. She was wary, yes, and cautious, but fear had changed into understanding. She understood the rules of this world. She understood Kaelin's power, and she understood a fragment of his heart. And most importantly, she understood something about herself. She was not broken. The forest outside the city was alive with whispers. Trees twisted into strange shapes, their gnarled branches forming arches like the skeletons of forgotten giants. The wind carried scents of wet earth and unknown flowers, and somewhere, deep in the undergrowth, water gurgled over rocks, singing a quiet, endless song. Lysandra's cloak was damp with morning dew, and her boots sank slightly into the soft soil as she followed Kaelin deeper into the forest. The mansion behind them felt like a distant memory, a gilded cage that had shaped her, taught her, and tested her. But now, in the isolation of this wild, ancient place, everything was raw and dangerous. "This way," Kaelin said, his voice calm yet firm. His eyes scanned the shadows constantly, noting movements Lysandra could not see. He moved like a predator, silent and deliberate, yet always aware of her presence just behind him. She kept close. Her mind raced with questions, but she dared not speak them aloud. She had learned that in Kaelin's world, patience, observation, and timing were often more powerful than words. The forest opened into a clearing where the moonlight fell like silver rain. In the center stood a stone circle, covered in moss and carved with symbols that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Lysandra felt her pulse quicken. This was no ordinary forest. Magic hummed in the air, subtle but undeniable, stirring memories in her that she did not yet understand. Kaelin motioned for her to stand in the center. "Tonight," he said, "you will face the trial that shows whether you can trust your instincts and your heart." Lysandra's stomach twisted with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She did not know what the trial would be, only that it would be difficult, perhaps dangerous. But she had learned to trust Kaelin in a way she had never trusted anyone before, and that trust gave her courage. From the shadows, figures began to emerge. At first she could barely make them out, shapes cloaked in darkness, moving silently. They circled the clearing, their eyes glowing faintly. Kaelin stepped closer to her. "These are not enemies," he said softly. "They are reflections. Shadows of fear, doubt, and pain. You must confront them not with force but with understanding." Lysandra's breath caught. Shadows of fear, pain. She realized suddenly that this trial was not just physical, it was inside her. The first shadow stepped forward, tall and looming, its shape shifting constantly. It spoke in a voice that echoed her own thoughts. "You are weak. You are powerless. You will never survive here." Lysandra's instinct was to flee, to hide, to retreat into safety. But Kaelin's presence steadied her. She focused on the black stone in her hand, feeling its subtle warmth pulse against her palm. Slowly, she lifted her head and looked at the shadow. "I am not weak," she said quietly. "I have survived. I will survive." The shadow recoiled slightly, as if her words had struck it and then dissolved into mist. Another shadow appeared, smaller this time, whispering words of doubt and regret. "You do not belong here. You are a mistake. You are a curse upon those you love." Lysandra's throat tightened. She thought of her family, of the life she had been taken from, and of Kaelin, who had trusted her with tasks she could barely understand. She swallowed her fear. "I am not a mistake," she said, voice steady, "and I will not let the past control me." Again the shadow faded. One by one she faced them all, the fears she had carried since childhood, the doubts sown by her enemies, the guilt she had tried to hide even from herself. Each time she grew stronger, more certain. The forest seemed to hum in response, the energy around her aligning with the rhythm of her heartbeat. Kaelin watched from the edge of the circle, his expression unreadable. Yet inside, he felt a mixture of awe and something he could not name. Lysandra was changing before his eyes, not just in skill or courage, but in spirit. She was becoming more than a pawn in the dangerous game of his world. She was becoming a force, a presence he could neither control nor resist. When the last shadow finally dissolved, the clearing fell silent. Lysandra's knees trembled, but she stood tall, feeling a strange sense of triumph and clarity. She turned to Kalen. "I did it," she said, breathless. "Yes," Kalen said, stepping into the circle beside her. "You did, but remember, strength is not just power. Strength is knowing when to use it and when to wait." She nodded, understanding the weight of his words. In this world, every choice had consequences, and the line between survival and destruction was thin. Over the next days, they remained in the forest, forced into exile by threats that still lingered from the city. Kaelin continued her training, not just with the stone, but with his knowledge of strategy, caution, and intuition. He taught her how to move silently, how to sense danger before it appeared, and how to read people by their smallest gestures. And in the quiet moments when they were alone by the fire at night, their conversations became more personal. Lysandra learned fragments of Kaelin's story, the family he had tried to protect, the betrayal that had marked him, and the deal he had made with forces beyond human understanding to keep his empire safe. She shared pieces of herself too, though cautiously. She spoke of the family she had lost, of the guilt she carried for surviving when others had not, and of the fear that still lingered inside her despite her growing strength. Each story built a bridge between them, fragile yet real. Lysandra began to see Kaelin not just as a master or captor, but as a man who bore the weight of his choices, who was shaped by love, loss, and regret just as she was. One night the wind howled through the forest and Lysandra awoke to see Kaelin standing outside the tent, his figure framed by silver moonlight. "You are restless," he said. "I cannot stop thinking," she admitted, "about the forest, the shadows, and about what we are becoming." Kaelin's eyes softened. "You are learning to see the truth of yourself. That is both dangerous and necessary. And as for us," he paused, his voice low, "we are changing too, whether we like it or not." Lysandra felt her heart quicken. She did not understand all the implications, but she sensed the truth in his words. In the forest, away from the city, the masks they had worn, the fear, the control, the unyielding authority, were beginning to slip. But peace in the forest was short-lived. A sudden rustle in the undergrowth alerted them. Kaelin moved instantly, silent and swift, pulling Lysandra behind him. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked, and unmistakably human, yet carrying an unnatural aura. Kaelin's face darkened. "It seems our enemies are not the only ones watching." The figure stepped closer, and Lysandra saw its eyes pale, unblinking, and ancient. A chill ran down her spine. "You should not have come here," Kaelin said, his voice sharp, warning yet calm. The figure's lips moved, but no sound came. Instead, an image formed in Lysandra's mind. Visions of Kaelin's past, the bargains he had made, the people he had lost, and the consequences that still loomed. She gasped, clutching the stone, feeling its energy surge in response to her fear and resolve. Kaelin's hand brushed hers, grounding her. "Focus," he said quietly. "You can control this. Trust yourself." Lysandra closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. She allowed herself to feel the energy around her, the pull of the forest, the hum of the stone. Slowly, she projected calm, projecting her strength into the vision. The figure shivered, then vanished, leaving only the quiet hum of the forest and the moonlight spilling across the ground. Kaelin exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders. "You did well," he said, voice softer now. "Far better than I expected." As the night deepened, they sat by the fire in silence. Lysandra felt a connection she had never known, not just with Kaelin but with herself. She realized she was no longer the frightened girl handed over as punishment. She was a survivor, a learner, and perhaps a partner in ways she did not yet fully understand. Kaelin, too, seemed changed. He had always ruled with caution, distance, and power. Yet here, in the quiet of the forest, he allowed himself small gestures of trust, a shared silence, a watchful presence, a glance that lingered too long to be casual. The city lay beneath a silver dawn, the rain from previous storms leaving streets that gleamed like molten metal. From the balcony of the mansion, Lysandra gazed down at the quiet streets, watching mist curl around the corners where shadows lingered. The city was safe for now, but she knew safety was always temporary. Danger was patient. It waited. And somewhere beyond the veil of human sight, forces older than the city itself were stirring. Kaelin appeared behind her, silent as always. She did not startle. She had learned to sense him, to anticipate his presence even when the air was still. "You've changed," he said, voice low, carrying something more than observation, something softer, almost like wonder. "So have you," Lysandra replied. She kept her eyes on the streets below. "We survived the forest. We learned to control ourselves." "But the danger isn't gone, is it?" Kaelin's jaw tightened. "No, the rivals will not rest, and neither will the forces we disturbed in the forest. They wait for a moment of weakness. They will come for us and for the city." She nodded, gripping the black stone in her hand. Its warmth pulsed faintly, steady as a heartbeat, a reminder of the power she had begun to master. "Then we face them," she said simply. Kaelin's lips curved slightly, a rare, almost imperceptible smile. "Yes, together." The first threat came under the cover of night. Shadows moved through the city, figures cloaked and silent, slipping into the streets with precision. Kaelin and Lysandra had prepared the mansion. Traps, wards, and the careful alignment of the black stone's energy created a web of defense that few could penetrate. Lysandra stood at the edge of the central hall, stone in hand, sensing the movements around her. Kaelin's presence was close, guiding but never overpowering. For the first time she felt not like a pupil but like a partner. A group of intruders struck, their movements swift and coordinated. Lysandra focused on the black stone, feeling its energy respond to her will. She projected control outward, guiding shadows to block corridors, doors to lock, and paths to close. The intruders stumbled, disoriented by forces they could not understand. Kaelin moved with lethal precision, his hands and eyes directing the defense. But even as they fought side by side, Lysandra realized something vital. She was no longer dependent on him to survive. She could act, decide, and protect, and that knowledge made her stronger than fear ever could. When the last intruder was driven away, the city settled back into silence. Rain had begun to fall again, soft and gentle, washing the streets clean. Lysandra and Kaelin stood together in the hall, breathing heavily. "You've done well," Kaelin said, his tone measured but with an undercurrent of admiration. Lysandra smiled faintly, feeling the weight of exhaustion and relief. "We've done well," she corrected. In the following days, they turned their attention to the supernatural force that had emerged from the forest. The pale figure that had watched them was no ordinary spirit. It carried the memory of old bargains, of debts owed and promises broken. Lysandra and Kaelin knew they had to confront it, or the city would never truly be safe. They traveled to the heart of the forest again, the black stone now pulsing with a stronger, steadier energy. Kaelin's presence was at her side, and together they entered the clearing of the stone circle. The spirit emerged as before, pale and silent, its eyes holding the weight of ages. Kaelin stepped forward first, but Lysandra grasped his arm. "This time," she said, voice firm, "we face it together, not as master and pupil but as equals." Kaelin's eyes softened and he nodded. "Together," he echoed. The spirit's presence pressed down upon them, cold and demanding, showing visions of debts unpaid and the consequences of mistakes past. Lysandra felt the pull, the temptation to falter, but she clenched the black stone, feeling the warmth flow through her. "Face it," she said to Kaelin, "not alone." He looked at her, seeing courage, understanding, and trust in her eyes. And then, together, they projected their strength outward, combining their energy, their intent, and their trust. The spirit recoiled at the force of their will. Images of fear and doubt shattered against the wall of their shared determination. The black stone blazed with silver light, connecting them, binding them together in purpose. Slowly, the spirit dissolved, leaving only silence and a sense of balance restored. They sank to the ground, exhausted but victorious. Kalen turned to Lysandra, the mask of authority replaced by a rare, genuine warmth. "You did more than I expected," he said quietly. "You did not just survive, you led. You faced what many could not." Lysandra smiled faintly. "I had a teacher," he shook his head. "No, you had courage, and he paused, searching for words. "I had someone I could trust." For a long moment they sat in silence, feeling the connection that had grown between them through fear, struggle, and shared victories. Returning to the city, Lysandra and Kalen found it transformed, not by magic alone but by their combined effort. The streets were quieter, the shadows less threatening, the whispers of old threats fading into history. And yet the city still held secrets, mysteries that would demand vigilance. The mansion was a place of safety now, but also of reflection. Lysandra walked through the halls she had once feared, touching the walls, remembering the girl who had arrived as punishment, trembling and uncertain. That girl had changed. She had learned, fought, and grown. And she had done it not alone, but with someone who had once been her captor and had become her partner in every sense. Kalen watched her from the balcony above, silently observing, as he had done countless times before. But now there was no distance between them, no barrier of fear or command. They were equal in strength, in trust, in understanding. One evening, Lysandra and Kalen stood together on the balcony, watching the city beneath the soft glow of moonlight. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain and wet stone. The streets were quiet, but she could feel the pulse of the city, alive and wary as if it knew what had been done. "You've grown," Kalen said, his voice low. "And yet there is more to learn, more to protect." "More to face," Lysandra nodded. "I know, but we've faced the worst already, and we did it together." He turned to her, eyes meeting hers. For the first time he let himself speak freely, without restraint. "I have lived with power and fear all my life," he said quietly. "I never believed I could trust anyone. I never believed I could care. But you," he paused, his gaze steady. "You've changed that, not just for me, but for myself." Lysandra felt a warmth rise in her chest, a mixture of relief, recognition, and something she dared not name. She reached for his hand, and for a long moment their fingers intertwined, holding not out of need, but choice. Days passed in quiet rebuilding. Lysandra continued to master the black stone, using it to protect the city and its people from lingering threats. Kalen focused on the empire he had once ruled with fear, now reshaped by wisdom and cooperation. The city began to hum with life, safer than it had been for decades, and in the quiet, unspoken moments, Lysandra and Kalen discovered the depth of their bond. It was not love born of convenience or passion, but of trust, respect, and shared struggle. They had faced fear together, mastered power together, and confronted forces that demanded both courage and wisdom. And in that process they had found each other. But even as peace settled over the city, shadows lingered. The forces they had faced were not entirely gone. Ancient debts and whispered curses still moved beneath the surface. Lysandra felt it in the quiet hum of the stone, in the subtle shifts of energy around the city. And Kalen, ever watchful, knew it too, yet neither of them feared it now. Together, they had learned to face darkness without faltering. Together, they had become stronger than the fears that had once ruled them. As the sun rose one morning, spilling gold across the streets and towers, Lysandra stood at the balcony, the black stone warm in her hand. Kalen joined her, silent but present. And for the first time she felt not like a prisoner, not like a pawn, but like a guardian of something greater, a city, a legacy, and a bond forged in shadows and light. "Whatever comes next," Kalen said, voice quiet but steady, "we face it together." Lysandra smiled. "Together," she repeated. And in that moment the city below seemed to breathe with them, alive and whole, a testament to courage, trust, and the quiet power of hearts transformed.